and what we can expect in the future. We're also working with ITS, Department of State, and the New York State Digital Team on efforts to upgrade the committee's website, including a rebranding and separate email domain and landing page for COOG. Efforts on this project are continuing. We're hopeful that the results will provide our constituents with a better user experience and also significantly improve the usability of COOG's many posted resources, most especially the advisory opinions, which we are going to be re-indexing. Finally, we're continuing talks with third-party online platforms in an effort to further publish the COOG's advisory opinions, make them more accessible to all who need and use them statewide and beyond. Some of these projects involve the expenditure of funds, and we will be moving forward just as soon as we can commit those funds to do that.
Your activities with respect to the opinions, the 22 advisory opinions, could either you or Kristen fill us in if there were any unusual, interesting issues that were raised with a view to whether they might be issues that we should address in our annual report?
Certainly, I can ask Kristen to take a look through the 22 and give us an email concerning any issues of note that have come up. My assessment of the advisory opinions that have been issued are that they were not of significant new moment, mainly applying existing law and interpretations to new sets of facts that came up. Maybe one or two, however, that I'll talk with Kristen about and we can provide you summaries of.
Okay. Could I ask a question? Sorry, Shoshana, I'm just curious about how you've set things up. I know you're new to the job, but like the buck sort of stops with you. So when these opinions come in, how do you flag if something is kind of problematic or sensitive, and do you review the formal opinions before they go out?
I absolutely do. Kristen and I communicate closely on a daily basis. He and I collaborate on each and every opinion that is issued, whether it is signed by her or me.
Do you have any guidelines or standards about like when you would bring an issue to the board because it's new or novel?
Absolutely. We can skip to that piece of the agenda if you wish. It was a formal item on the agenda. We can keep skipping around, or I can go back and cover the agenda in the order that it was. That's helpful.
Why don't you stick to your order? I didn't mean to pull you out.
Well, wait a minute. Okay. Before we move on to item 3, let me go back to report on recent activities. I noticed you didn't mention anything about training, which was one of our principal activities prior to March 15th or thereabouts. Can you tell us what, if anything, you and your staff have been doing in the way of training?
Well, I did mention it, Franklin, but I'll re-say it. We conducted 10 live or webcast training sessions during the time period, both traveling and not traveling. In June, there's been an uptick, and I conducted a few additional ones in June. But yes, we have continued to provide training, both formal and informal, in the way of responding to telephone inquiries. Large portion of response to telephone inquiries involves informal training.
Yeah, well, I was talking about the training sessions. Did you consider, or maybe you did, have a half hour, or 3-hour training session that people could log into and see independent of having a live person in front of them? What exactly did you do in terms of group training the way we used to do?
All of the trainings that we've been providing over the last couple of months have been group training, either by way of WebEx, where people would log on just like we're doing now, or in-person training before the prohibition on doing such trainings really became patent. I had many scheduled that were live, that were to have taken place in the spring, that didn't take place and have been postponed, and will take place as soon as it's feasible for that to happen. But some did happen live, and many are happening and are scheduled to happen online.
So you had 10, so you had 10 live group trainings between March 15th and June 15th.
No, we had 10 trainings between January and May.
My question is, how many
WebEx
happened
trainings.
between March, well, after the shutdown in March?
I've personally done 3. Kristen, how many have you done?
Off the top of my head, I want to say I did 4 or 5.
Thank
I'm
you.
glad we did that many. I'd like to suggest that we could do more. But I guess we're moving. It's not clear to me whether we're moving back to whether there will be any more in-person trainings anytime soon. And it would be nice to see that stepped up.
We certainly would, and that is among our plans to do. We have given a training to every group that's asked.
And the ones that canceled on you didn't ask. Is that the gist?
Well, if they canceled a live presentation, the expectation is that it'll probably get rescheduled down the road.
Many of the live ones that were canceled were big annual meetings of groups. So they are going to be rescheduling those meetings, and hopefully our program will be included in whatever they reschedule. We've maintained contact about that possibility.
Okay, that's good.
I just want to say something from a technical perspective. I'm going to mute everyone right now because it will help with the feedback. And if I could just ask everyone just to be, affirmatively unmute themselves when they go to speak and mute themselves when they're done. So I apologize for the inconvenience, but it will help with the feedback.
All right, so Franklin, are you, I didn't mean to cut you off. Are you ready for me to move on?
Move on to, I guess what we have is 3, the hiring of additional staff. Why don't you fill us in on that?
Sure. So as you probably know, I hit my keyboard. I hope I didn't cut myself off. The Department of State has approved the hiring of an additional attorney to assist us with some of the modernization projects that would be conditions precedent to doing more publication of our
I can't hear you.
Yeah, one of the things we'd like to do is the review of the opinions to ensure that they are all still consistent with controlling law. And we are doing that. One of the reasons we have approval to hire additional staff and additional attorney is to help us with that project, which I consider to be one of the conditions precedent to moving our advisory opinions more broadly online in third-party hosted platforms, etc. So we have completed a recruitment cycle for that, but in light of statewide budget concerns, we deprioritized that hiring and will reprioritize it as soon as it is practical for us. That completes the report on the hiring of additional staff. I can move on to the functioning of the committee. The first item, David, is one of is what you alluded to earlier, which is the coordination on the issuance of certain opinions. We've talked briefly about this, you and I have, but for the broader committee, because the Committee on Open Government is a collective body, and the job of the staff of the committee is principally to provide guidance to anyone who asks about FOIL, OML, and PPPL. It will be my practice to consult with the committee members when I'm asked to provide guidance on a new provision of law or a provision of law on which COOG has never before opined and on which there is no judicial precedent. I don't think that that has been done in the past, but it will accurately reflect the committee's will as a body and how the committee wishes to speak as a body, rather than just one person or one small set of persons' ideas about how to interpret something that has never before been interpreted. So that is my intention. And that is how I will operate. David, I hope that answers your question.
I appreciate that, Shoshana. And I agree with you that the committee kind of fell into a sorry state in the last several years where Bob had been with us for so long that things kind of didn't happen that should happen. The one other thing, and it's maybe we should have a conversation offline, but I just have some concerns that in applying our past precedent, is everybody getting this horrible feedback?
Yes.
Bad.
I don't know what's going on, but that's better now. One of the things that's harder to put my finger on is just a concern that as I see the role of this committee, it's not just sort of routinely applying precedent, but it's being an advocate for disclosure whenever possible, which often means that we're going to be kind of at loggerheads with bureaucrats or people who have legitimate concerns of budget pressures, time pressures, other things. And it came up recently because I just became aware of an opinion involving an upstate town where the town executive had been terminated after a lengthy investigation, and the local TV station asked to see that investigation. And there was an opinion issued by the committee that basically said, well, the town board ultimately concluded that the allegations were unfounded and therefore personal privacy overcomes it. But on the circumstances of that case, where there was one charge and they said it's not charged, but as a result of the investigation, the supervisor who'd been there for, I think, decades was terminated. It seems to me that there should be kind of a different analysis. And so just citing a principle that says if a charge is not made, you get me. And again, I don't know all the facts, but I guess the question I'm getting at is that I just hope that you and Kristen see our role as advocating for disclosure whenever possible, and that you bring that to your consideration of these requests, and that you get to the bottom of the facts to be sure that when information that on its face seems like the sort of thing taxpayers should know is being withheld, that there's really good reasons for it.
I think Kristen and I unequivocally agree with you that is our role, and that in a close question, we were going to pivot to the side of disclosure over not. I think it's critical to understand the facts, and one of the things that I know Kristen has always done and I will continue to do is to inquire of both ends of the equation to ensure that we understand as many facts as people are willing to tell us to make an appropriate decision. I'm not sure about the facts of the case that you're particularly referencing, whether there was causality between event A and decision B. Very difficult to know. Just off the top of my head, it's difficult. You and I can certainly chat offline about whatever facts we had surrounding the creation of the advisory opinion you referenced. But by and large, I don't think there's an instance that I can recall in my very short tenure where the decision that we issued formally fell on the withhold side of the line, where there was a line versus the disclosure side. So I don't think it was a close call. We leaned in favor of disclosure. Kristen, if you'd like to comment on that, please do.
I would agree with that. I think generally we're going to advocate in favor of disclosure when appropriate, when possible, but personal privacy it's an important issue. I say that everybody's always in favor, there's always transparency advocates, and everyone's in favor of full transparency and full disclosure until it affects them personally. So those are the things that we need to take into consideration, that, public employees enjoy a lesser expectation of privacy, but it doesn't mean they don't enjoy any expectation of privacy. So those are elements that we need to take into consideration.
Sure. I just think that the termination of a long-term high-ranking, public official is the sort of thing that could raise a lot of red flags. And anyway, I'd be happy to talk with you both offline. I just think it's really important to have the orientation of.
If anyone is speaking, we can't hear you, so.
I could hear David there. I could hear him and I understood his point. And I think it will be worthwhile, David, especially if you want to talk through the specifics of that particular opinion. But in general, our philosophy comports exactly with what you're saying.
Thank you.
David, this is Joel Lombardi talking. Could you just send that around to everybody? I'm just curious. I'd like to take a look at it too.
I'm not sure I have the actual opinion, but I will try to track it down. This was just something that was brought to my attention by a lawyer who was litigating the case and wanted to know, what the odds were.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, just if you have the reference, I kind of want to take a look at it. Thanks.
But I think that does raise the question of whether, if it's not too much a burden, to send around some of the more notable opinions. I know a few are on the website, but it might be of interest to board members, instead of having to check the website to see what's there, if you could send them around to us. And it also might get the board more engaged if they could see the kinds of opinions you're being asked to render. So I would ask for an increase in the communications between board and staff about opinions.
Certainly, I can send the committee members formal opinions as they're issued. Certainly, the committee members will be hearing about opinions that are of the type that I just described, which would be opinions without precedent on new provisions of law. Then you would be involved in understanding the process of how we develop that opinion, and would have input and comments into the process if you disagreed with where we were headed, or if you agreed with where we were heading as well. The next item on the agenda is joint projects and appearances. And similar to Franklin, your desire to understand more about the opinions as they're being issued, I'll provide a quarterly information to the committee members reflecting requested presentations. This includes trainings, Franklin, to third parties, or participation in third-party projects, to ensure that you're aware of the outreach that the committee staff is doing. So you can expect to see on a quarterly basis the trainings and or presentations or projects that we've been asked to participate in and we are participating in. So that should hopefully give you a little bit more information for your consideration.
I would add too that I think it's helpful if you're doing a presentation, a live presentation. And again, that may not be happening anytime soon. But if you're doing one in New York City or in Rochester or someplace where board members are, I know the staff used to tell us so that we could come and watch you all in action. And I availed myself of that several times. So I think that would be a helpful thing to add on.
And not only watch, there were occasions when we were asked for our opinions about issues as an individual, not in speaking for the committee.
I think that that's a great idea, and I will include upcoming dates and times of trainings to the extent practical. When I'll make just regular notifications to committee members so that they can be aware that something is happening, what the venue is, whether it's live or online, and make a plan to be there if they wish, or participate if they wish, as far as tuning. Okay, the next item on the agenda is says proposed legislation. What I will say about this is that it will be a standard item on our agenda. So the committee members who desire to propose amending legislation for FOIL or OML or PPPL, or if the staff of the committee has been considering possible legislation concerning those amendments to those 3 statutes, there's a regular cadence for our discussion, leading up to any collective recommendations that we may make in the annual report. So this will be an item that appears, and we can make use of it as appropriate to either take action or to discuss or to do any number of things appropriate with respect to this category of proposal. The next item would be defining our strategic priorities. I know David had talked to me about adding this item to the agenda, and I agree with it. Recognizing that the priorities of the staff of the committee will continue to provide advice and guidance on our 3 statutes to anyone who requests it. The committee as a body may introduce other strategic priorities for its work, and this item will be a standard item on our agenda to permit us to discuss additional strategic priorities that the committee members may wish to have us all collectively work on or have the staff work on, if the body so desires it to be a priority.
So Shauna, could I just say a couple words? I mean, I appreciate you adding this. One of the things that caused me to want to reach out to you about some of these things is again, I think we fell into some bad habits in the final decades of your predecessor's reign. And while I understand that the focus is to be sure that the 3 laws we have are being implemented well, when this all started way back in 74, 75, New York was kind of on the cutting edge of creating transparency rules and doing things that now everybody does. And I think in many places they do it better than us. Bob used to talk to us over the years about how Mexico had a much more innovative freedom of information law than anything we do in the United States. And the question is, that this ties to both, proposed legislation and strategic priorities, is how do we go about educating ourselves about potential innovations or different ways of doing things that we should be thinking. I think, frankly, that to the extent we're going to be able to do that, a lot of it's going to fall on your shoulders because you're the one who kind of is positioned to be seeing what's going on out there. And I know you've only been there less than 6 months now, and you've got some huge priorities, and I think your priorities are good. Technological innovation and getting us into the 21st century in terms of our record keeping. I guess there were a couple of things. One is, what could we be thinking about that we might put on your plate to think about, and how can you go about doing these things? And they're kind of 2 different things. So on the one hand, it seems to me there are a lot of organizations that share information, and I just want to be sure that you're getting plugged into that network. An international network of freedom of information officers, there's state networks, the Free Expression Network, and others. I just hope that you're getting involved in those, because that's a place where you'll be getting ideas about what other people are doing. And we could talk about that offline too. But the other piece is, where are we right now? And one of the things, thinking ahead about the report for me is what have we learned from this current moment? Set aside Black Lives Matter, we've been arguing about police accountability in this committee for years, and I'm glad that we finally crossed the Rubicon. But what about the COVID issue? What can we learn from the COVID crisis about holes in our transparency regime here? And one of them is just, how good have we been at getting the data people need to know about the crisis out? And I know there's been a lot of work done at the national level about state by state comparison. Some states won't give out anything because they say HIPAA is a problem, and it's been a huge problem. But for instance, I'm not necessarily advocating this, but there might be things we could do is look county by county. What data was actually made available and what wasn't? Why did it differ in different counties? And is there anything we can learn there about how the law should be changed so that that sort of critical health information is available? That's just one thing. But I think we need to get out of the trenches. I think your arrival is a real opportunity to kind of think bigger than just getting the opinions out and being sure the laws are being carried on. And I thought we should have a discussion around that, because I do think that there's a lot of things we could do to become advocates for different types of transparency.
Well, I agree. There's plenty of stuff that we and other groups are designed or have been set up to do. I would be happy to listen to, read about, understand, learn more about how other entities, other governments, other entities deal with freedom of information. I feel like I know a little bit about how New York does it and how the federal government does it, just because I've been applying those laws and trying to understand those things for a while now. But as far as a proposal that we could make to broaden transparency, I think certainly that belongs in our annual report. certainly it's something that we should begin building toward now if it's something that the committee is going to decide to move forward with. So I'm open to any suggestion that anyone has. Just everyone bearing in mind that I have been here since January, and several months of the time since January have been simply trying to figure out how to continue to operate well when everyone is busy doing other things, when the entire government is focused on a single issue with good reason. It's been difficult to make forward progress on wish lists. But I definitely take your point, David, that transparency is more than just a wish list item. It should be a strategic priority, and I think that we will get there. We may not get there with the full 8-car train this year, but we're certainly going to be heading toward that every time we meet, every time we are more practical about, I think our analysis of who's been contacting us, what our common issues are, other than just a review of some of the advisory opinions that have been issued in the past, which through no fault really of anyone except the lack of technology have become cyclical. You see the same things sort of rearing themselves in cycles, and because it happened 5-10 years before, you kind of forget that you've dealt with the issue. So if we can sort of see into those trends, figure out where we really are seeing problems. I know that Kristen is very knowledgeable about some of our really problematic areas because she's been really focused on hearing from people day in and day out about what is troubling them about our regime right now. And I'm certain that she and I together, and I think some of those issues have appeared in the report before, but that she and I together can make those more visible to you and the rest of the members of the committee for consideration on whether we can tinker with anything to alleviate some of those concerns.
This is Steve Waters. I think that one of the things that David was actually hinting at could be something we put in the job jar, which is another section of our report, which is a brief bullet point of what other political ends, whether they're other nation states, so forth, are doing that might be some things we wish to consider in the future. And that really ends up being battlefield prep to help us put our own state in next year or the year after. So to the degree that there ends up being time, we might want to hint at or mention some of the things that other people are doing.
You just said,
I think
Steve.
that's a very nice idea.
Yeah, what you just said, Steve, is a lead in to a thought I had too, which is last fall the committee was very clear that it wanted to start discussing the substantive issues earlier in the year. In fact, we talked about February. So we're not going to get to that, I think, in this meeting this time. But was a strong feeling not to wait till September, October, November to begin mulling over old things we've written about and how we want to deal with them this year and new ideas. So let's set up a meeting sooner rather than later to begin moving to the substance of the issues before the committee, including the kinds of things Dave and Stephen have just mentioned.
Franklin, I agree with you. And actually in our other business section, I was going to offer you the floor to begin the discussion since I had understood that you were interested in adding that item to our agenda. Certainly. Let's feel free to talk about it. We can do that now before we talk about the next item, or we can save it for the other business.
No, that's where I had planned on doing it, but I thought it segued with the points that were just made. And I don't know that I think we have time or are prepared to go to that today. Let's see what we have in the way of time.
Certainly. We can talk for a moment then about bylaws, which is something that one of my earliest discoveries upon arriving at the committee was that it was a body without bylaws or standard procedures of any kind. And the enabling legislation contains, our structure and our mandates, but is otherwise not a model of clarity about how we're supposed to operate. It doesn't include any guidance for our standard operations other than direct that we meet at least twice a year and issue a report. So we certainly do those things, and I hope to be able to do more. And as we standardize the way we operate, it could help, us with all of the things that Franklin and David and Stephen, to the extent you mentioned today, more frequent communication, more formal collaboration, opportunities for us to work together to understand where we want our strategic direction to be aiming. So I think that a bylaws or a procedures will help us with that. It's my hope that they will ensure routine and prevent anything from falling through the cracks. Certainly will help us with understanding a cadence leading up to an annual report. With all of that in mind, I'm going to circulate a draft of potential bylaws for consideration and comments. Everyone's feedback is welcome. We're going to incorporate everyone's feedback and possibly and hopefully be able to tee up a vote to adopt or reject the concept of bylaws and the bylaws themselves at the next meeting. But at a high level, I think bylaws should cover standardization of procedures for operations, frequency of member attendance at meetings, and how our expectations of each other. I mean, I'll be at every meeting, but not every member comes to every meeting. Certainly this meeting is very well attended. Thank you all for coming. It's much appreciated. And we'd like to continue and incentivize all of you members to come to every meeting, and hopefully a more standard way of operating will incentivize that. And the logistics of our meetings and how, especially as we move forward in this uncertain time, we may or may not get back to meeting in person in the near future. Certainly during the pendency of the declared disaster emergency, it'll be very difficult to convince a lot of people to gather together face to face, especially in smaller rooms or where you don't have room for everyone who might want to join. We have a lot of people listening in today who might have wished to come to a live location if it weren't, potentially threatening to their health to do that. So that's my suggestion. I do intend to circulate a draft relatively soon. I will then accept, as a logistics, everyone's feedback. I'll be the sort of typer, and then we'll recirculate and hopefully tee up a meeting so that we can vote. And at that meeting, we can also potentially be prepared to discuss things toward the annual report and other items that have come up today that people are interested in continuing to talk about. Hope in the hope that it might make a new section in the annual report. Stephen, I like that idea a lot. And assuming we have time, wherewithal, I mean, our staff, the entirety of the COOG staff is on this call. And hopefully we'll have more, but we're going to be patient about that. So that was what I wanted to say about bylaws, unless anyone wanted to jump in here and add something.
Yeah, Shoshana, this is Joel Lombardi. I just wanted to mention sort of my thoughts real quick, in the hopes that, as you sort of develop and formulate them pretty, I know you said it was going to be pretty soon, because I think this is my third or maybe fourth meeting, but my first thought was, and I had approached Kristen after I think it was the first or second meeting I attended, because there was no formal designation required for myself. So I'm assuming for the other ex officio designees. And that's something that on other committees and other bodies that I've been a member of was always a very important sort of threshold issue. So I thought to myself, that's not good, right? We should have some sort of regular process to ensure that, not that anybody here is not supposed to be here, but just, we should have those processes, as a mature committee. So I thought that was important. The other issues, of course, the first thing that came to my mind was the meeting frequency. I mean, I think that the statute sets the floor, but I think we could go above that, right? So, I agree with what you said about the meeting frequency. I think that I agree with Franklin that we should be having meetings. I mean, obviously this is a special circumstance, but definitely last year when I was in attendance, we talked about meeting as early as we could that was practical to discuss the annual report. My feelings on the annual report last year was that it was more or less, a restatement of things that we had done the prior years, which wasn't always bad, but, we should be constantly taking a fresh look at it. And the more time we have to do that, the better we are, the more thoughtful we are, the more abreast we are of, current circumstances. I also think that we should address the committee structure. I think that we should address, and I hope nobody takes this in the wrong way, but I really do see us as a committee of equals, and I think that should represent that should be represented in any bylaws that we discuss, but we can obviously bring that to a future meeting when we react to what you send. That's just my 2 cents. So if anybody else has any ideas, that's my 2 cents from my observations of being here for roughly a year.
Thanks, Joel. I'll certainly work those ideas into the draft that I have percolating. I do hope to turn that around relatively quickly for everyone to consider. I agree with you, Franklin. We shouldn't wait too much longer to keep scheduling. We did have a meeting scheduled for April that was set to be after the budget was finalized. And then, you know, circumstances intervened, shall we say. So we've been operating to the beat of a different drummer for a while. But I think we are now all in a position where we can figure out how to meet, and I will schedule the next meeting just as soon after I circulate and hear back from folks as I can. But so moving on to other or new business, but before we take on substantive new business, and I just wanted to take a moment, we've alluded to it a couple times as we've spoken here today, but I wanted to take a moment to celebrate the repeal of Section 50A of the Civil Rights Law. This is an issue that has interested this committee and appeared as a recommendation in its annual report for many years, at least 5 that I'm aware of. I'm happy to report that legislative staff referenced our reports during their bill drafting session and thanked the committee for its thoughtful analyses. Counsel for the legislature familiar with the committee's reports over the years and reached out to me to ensure that they understood the ramifications of any repeal of 50A on FOIL. It was in fact a privilege to be able to discuss these matters with the very people who are responsible for drafting the historic legislation that emerged earlier this month, and it demonstrates the value of the committee's recommendations and contributions. So now we can move on to other business. I wanted to just take a moment to celebrate that and make that statement. And again, we've already covered this, but I did have information that Franklin wanted to raise the annual report. But Franklin, do you have anything further you want to add on that?
Can I just say something
yeah,
about 50A before we move on? Just by way of background, Shoshana, since you weren't on the committee, it's reminding me that I think that was a really useful process that we went through as a committee, because it's been in the report for 5 years, but we started by having, we thought of it as a hearing, but it was like a fact gathering session that was in the spring one year, maybe May or June. And we had some press lawyers come in who had been litigating 50A issues. And the head of the corrections union, workers union came. And we had a really substantive back and forth. And I think we wrote the report, which I think our first year was not as full-throated as it got later. And I think that process, that's I guess what I was alluding to about some of these things. If we look around where there are issues, some of this requires some kind of fact gathering and getting everybody to understand an issue from the, from the different perspectives. To me, that was a really useful exercise, and it led to, I think, a really thoughtful report.
I agree. I think that it was in our annual report since 2014. I could be wrong. I know it wasn't in the earliest reports since I began serving on the committee. And I think a corollary issue is the body cam issue, which we also identified early as a problem or as a potential 50A problem. And that's one that also seems to be going by the wayside. So it's great. We'll have to look for new issues to work on. But I agree. I think the back and forth between people on issues that was very illuminating. I do have one piece of, I don't know if it's new or old business, but Shoshana alluded to, well, I guess alluded to is the right word, the difficulties we have in reaching a quorum. Hopefully we'll get a little more excitement from the committee when we meet more often and are thinking through issues that we've chewed on more recently. But we only have 10 full members, 10 members now instead of the 12. That is our full complement. I'm not positive, because I'm not positive what everyone does, but I think we may be shy on our requirement that we have 2 members of the news media on our board. And we have at least 2 members, and I'm not going to embarrass anybody by saying who they are, but we have 1 member who had not been at a meeting since 2016 and one who hadn't been at a meeting since 2017. I am hopeful that they haven't actually resigned and that they'll come back and be full members, but it's fair to say for the last 3 or 4 years, we've really only had 8 active members, and that takes a toll on our trying to have a quorum and, of course, the full and robust debate that we should be having. We have raised this repeatedly, and if anyone has any ideas on how to get the governor's office to move forward on some nominees, we've put I know Dave alone has put forward 6 or 7 names. Anyone else can promote. We don't really have a mechanism, and the way we are as a committee, we can't just unilaterally declare people who haven't come for years no longer members because they weren't in fact appointed by us. They were appointed by somebody else. So that's a bit of a rambling thing to say. This is something we really need to get fixed, and our efforts so far have not resulted in more members. So let me
Franklin,
just put that on the list. Yeah.
one of the things I think that is a handicap has been the ossified way that we meet, which is Buffalo, New York City, and Albany. And so I pay a 4-hour price each time I attend a meeting. Today's meeting is revolutionary because I'm actually able not to travel and still attend. And that should be one of the considerations in the future.
This is Joel. I think that's actually a great idea in terms of future discussion on how to advocate for change, right? In open meetings law, just something to think about, making things more accessible.
And there was a kernel of an idea proposed by legislative member Hoylman, Senator Hoylman, earlier this session, before the governor acted to suspend the in-person requirement temporarily. There was a bit of legislation that was proposed that he called me and we discussed concerning discretion when there is a threat to health or safety. That's obviously very limited, but there's the idea, and I think now people are getting used to meeting in this way and openness in this way. You know, it'll never be palatable to everybody, but I do appreciate, Stephen, that you were able to attend today almost because it fits into your schedule since you don't have to travel so long to do it. And that gives us a lot more flexibility to do the kinds of meetings that we may need to effectuate change. So I appreciate all these things, and I do think we should put it in the bucket of things to think about how to do while not sacrificing transparency.
Can I go back to the issue about members? I agree with the point that Franklin was making about how it would be really valuable to have an active membership. And I guess I'm faulting myself here because I've been pushing for this for a while, even when Bob was still around, by giving the names that I had of people I thought would be good to Bob, and I never know what happened. And then when he was gone, I think I gave them to Jim. So maybe that's a lack of institutional awareness on my part. But I guess what I'm thinking now is maybe you, Shoshana, or Franklin, as the board chair, should write to the appointing authorities, the 3 people who appoint people, and say, we just want you to realize that this is an issue for our committee. We do important work. We would really make it sort of a more formal request from the committee to the appointing authorities to fill the vacancies, just to kind of ratchet up a little awareness of the
I think the other 2 appointing entities are the Assembly, which has appointed me some number of years ago, and Steve, you're the Senate, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. And are you in holdover status? I don't even know.
Yes, I am.
I could be too. I don't know.
Every member of this committee is in holdover status. Every single
that's
one.
what I thought. I'm on vacation without my folder to say when I was last appointed. And if the Assembly should choose to replace me, that would be just fine with me. But you can't leave, Stephen. You're one of our media representatives at the moment. Don't leave us with no one.
I think that's kind of you to say.
I'm just saying, I'm not, I think the main problem is with the governor's appointees, not to put a finger on him, but at least the Senate and Assembly have human beings sitting in warm chairs here. But I'm happy to write a letter if somebody will tell me who to send it to.
I think that's like, we'll circulate something for consideration on how we best effectuate the goal of ensuring that we have a full complement of active members. And then we can.
And just for the record, I'm a governor appointee and I'm a warm body.
I think David is a governor's appointee as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
But
I
it's
think
the
I actually was
missing
an
media
appointee
person.
of Governor Cuomo, the father. So it's been a while.
But the
Hadley, am I
missing
correct
media
in saying that you're a media representative?
Who?
Hadley. I'm asking Hadley.
I was appointed by the governor and I fulfill the category of media, though
Thank you.
I'm not an active reporter currently.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And I just want to make sure we have, that I say one more thing before we finish with new business. I wanted to make sure that all the committee members were aware that we've received a few inquiries concerning new additions to FOIL that were enacted earlier this month in conjunction with the repeal of 50A. We received a request for a formal advisory opinion, and in light of its novelty and the absence of judicial precedent, I plan to circulate a draft opinion soon for your thoughts and insights before we issue it. Should there be a need for a vote on the contents of the opinion, I'll schedule and convene a meeting to allow for that. I do not anticipate that there will be any objection to how we come out on this issue, but in the event that we need to vote on the content, again, I'll be happy to schedule and convene a meeting so that we can specifically vote on that. But be expecting that material soon as well for your consideration.
Shoshana,
And with that, I have no other new business.
Shoshana, can I just, that just kind of piques my curiosity. Something else that we were corresponding about earlier today, but I wonder if it would be within our bailiwick to collect up key legislative history and just have it available on our site. Like, because things in New York State, it's really hard to do legislative history research for the most part. And when things fall within our area of concern, like the debates around the repeal of 50A and the law that replaces it, maybe we should just be sweeping that up and having a spot on our website where people can find it.
That's definitely noted, David. I've asked for it. The jacket's not ready, but as soon as it is, I will circulate it to everyone. Frankly, I called to find out what the intent was of the particular question that we got. And the answer was, well, I think it means this, but there's nothing ready. The jacket's not ready. The debate's not done. I'll look through the video of it. But so I think, like I said, this particular issue, I don't think is very controversial. I think everyone's going to agree with how we've analyzed it. And I'll circulate that draft. But I agree in general, it's useful sometimes to see the legislative history.
Yeah, but I guess I would make a slightly different point too, which is, you know, the bill jacket itself that's kept usually is really incomplete. That's why I'm saying it could be a service to do, like if there is video of the debate or if there are memos from people who were lobbying and things like that, to just sweep it up and have it available for future people who are curious about how we ended up where we were, where we are.
Sure, assuming there's no significant cost associated, I'll be happy to take that on and try to figure out if we can get that stuff. So with that, I have no further business. Anyone else, any new business? No? Hearing nothing.
Before you hear nothing, I just want to say how pleased I am to have you here. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. I can't say how pleased I am to hear you say it. It's been a very strange time since January. Everyone's lives have turned completely upside down, so it's much appreciated. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity.
Yeah, Shoshana, I just wanted to add for my thanks to you and Kristen and Candace for maneuvering through an unprecedented pandemic. And from your report earlier, obviously keeping the wheels moving, keeping the important services of the committee going for all those New Yorkers who have needed guidance, whether it's navigating through changes to the open meetings law or dealing with, new sort of issues that they're confronting that relate to our well-trodden precedent on, how FOIL would work, but at a time when people want access to information, you and Kristen have been there giving that guidance, and I really appreciate that because you've kept the wheels turning, and I think this is a great meeting and a great start to more frequent meetings. I would add, I've seen, as we think about bylaw provisions and attendance, I've seen some bylaws that have called for something as simple as if there's 2 or 3 meetings successively missed by a member, standard letter will go to the appointing authority, just notifying them of that so that they can be alerted to it. Sometimes a provision like that can be very helpful. And it takes the burden off any one person to be overstepping or trying to, step on toes or offending a member who may fall into that category. Because it just becomes a standard thing, and it's a way of alerting the appointing authority that, hey, there's something going on here, and you should have a conversation or take note.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. I think that's an excellent suggestion. Definitely incorporate that and circulate it so everyone can react to it.
And Shoshana, this is Joel Lombardi. I just want to say thank you. You're the first appointed executive director of that committee. I haven't been here for not very long at all. But I wanted to thank you in particular for your modernization efforts. When I was attending, they don't really even teach you the books anymore. And so I really find your efforts to the indexing, the searchability, all of that is very helpful. Having taken a course in law school with your predecessor, it was very difficult for me to even do research for that class. And I really think that what you're going to do is going to increase the visibility of the committee and help us all with statutory charge. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you to everyone. Thank you, everyone who joined us remotely today to listen in and observe the deliberations of the committee and the staff. Appreciate everyone's time. And not hearing any further new business, I will consider this meeting adjourned and thank everyone again. Have a nice day, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.